And we are live here. This is episode 234 of In the Tank podcast. Today we are talking about a news report out of China. Actually, it's a think tank report out of China. Obviously, coronavirus stuff. We'll save some political stuff for the end on this episode of the In the Tank podcast. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I have got Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. Isaac Orr, what's up, sir?
Oh, not a whole lot. How are you doing? I don't have the virus yet, so I'm feeling great.
Oh, yes, we will get to that. It's obviously the hot topic. Also joining us, we have Jim Lakely, Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute. How are you, sir?
I am fine. I also don't have the Wuhan virus, although, as Isaac pointed out just before we started the podcast, I am the most at risk to die because I'm the oldest person on the podcast. So I'll try to self-quarantine myself to ensure my future life.
Yes, over 70 is what Jim is referring to. Also in the dark corner, we have producer extraordinaire, Andy Singer. How are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm on video, ready to make some points. Let's see how they go.
Yeah, J-Mobile, Justin Haskins, is struggling to join us. Yep. We'll see if he can get on, but as long as he's not on, you'll be on.
Yep.
How about that?
We replaced him with me. Finally an upgrade.
Yes, all right. So, gentlemen, obviously, coronavirus is the big news, but I think I might have bigger news personally.
Let's hear it.
So, remember like a month and a half ago, audience, we were talking about like population growth and kind of the stagnating population and just kind of the different political or policy implications of that. Well, I had a little bit of a homework assignment that I gave everybody. And I had Andy pull up my my homework assignment to you all. So let's play that clip from like a month and a half ago.
People who are in my generation are not having lots of kids. Many of them don't have kids, in fact. And most of the people I know who are my age do not have kids. So they're waiting until they get older to have kids, which means they end up having fewer kids, which means that when people get to be older, who is going to take care of them? I mean, really, when you think about it, when my generation is in their 70s, there's going to be even fewer people to take care of those people. So we are headed down a very unsustainable path. And it would be possible to plan for all of this, of course, if we had a better system in place. But the problem with the system we have now is it's a defined benefit system, which means you get benefits from the government regardless of all of these other factors. They're going to give them to you no matter what, no matter how bad things are financially, no matter what the deficit is, no matter how bad things are for the economy. They're going to keep giving you those benefits. That's the promise. And so how is this all going to work out 50 years from now? I just don't see how it's possible.
So I think we could take a step to fixing this. Homework for us all over between now and next week. We should all have children. So let's Andy, get on that. Isaac, get on that. Jim, get on that. I'm doing my.
It's true. Literally nobody on this podcast has kids.
No, it's kind of. I was thinking.
Isn't that nobody?
All right. So
I don't like where this is going.
Within 48 hours of me giving that homework assignment to you all, I found out that my wife is expecting.
Hooray!
What do you want to cook?
Great response. You guys are just a great.
Look at that.
Great crew. Yep. Boom.
That little peanut.
8 hours. I found that out. So I had Andy mark the tape and brought it all to you. So there you go.
This is bigger news than coronavirus. Then March Madness being canceled. I can't make a bracket this year, and you're talking to me about peanuts.
Donnie, congratulations. I think that is fantastic news. And as a man who doesn't have kids, as Justin pointed out, we're going to need another generation to take care of us, especially me. So, you'll be informed when I am infirm, and hopefully your progeny will nurse me to the grave, I guess.
Wuhan's going to sing you to sleep, Jim.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
Dark.
Yeah. So I guess we could take that as the segue if we want to. And just go right into it. Coronavirus.
That's right.
This was kind of a joke a few weeks ago. It seemingly is getting more and more crazy. by the day. So I'm going to abstain from doing jokes. I'll leave that to the Isaacs of the world.
Wow. Okay.
But so let me just kind of touch base with you all here. When we first talked about this, probably about a month ago, I asked you all on a scale of 1 to 10 how nervous you were about this. Isaac said a 0. Justin said a 0. I forget what Jim said. Then 2 weeks ago, I don't think Jim was on this episode. Again, I asked, okay, now how nervous are you? And I believe Justin said a 1.5. And Isaac also said a 1.5 out of 10. So I ask you again, considering all of the stuff that's going on, we can go through the list, all the sporting events, the presidential decree when he spoke on Wednesday night, all the sporting events that are being canceled, the NBA closed, NHL suspended their season, they're delaying the MLB, conferences across the world are being closed. How nervous are we now? Scale of 1 to 10, Isaac.
More than 1.5. Let's put it that way. I don't know. I'd say like a 7. I've got a trip with my mom and sister scheduled to come up, and I think we're still going to go. But it is also one of those things. Well, we're on a plane. They're going to recycle the air, so we're shaking the dice there.
7. That is much higher than I thought you were going to go. How about you there, Andy? Andy Singer.
Me? Okay, 2 differences here. One, how afraid am I of the actual virus? Not very afraid. Great health, great eating. I'm young. I'm not going to die. But how afraid I am of the panic? They just shut down the NBA season, which is by far my favorite thing. I'm terrified. If I lose the NBA, if I lose the NFL, if March Madness is done, this is terrible. This is terrible. Plus, if, we run out of toilet paper or we run out of delicious foods, I'm afraid of the panic.
Sure. I'm actually on board with that.
Yeah. So I would put my fear of the panic at a 8.
Oh, 8 out of 10. Oh, my goodness. All right, Jim, you were the most concerned about this the month ago when we first started talking about it. Where are you?
Well, I was most concerned because I thought China was lying about the spread of the Wuhan virus, and they were lying about the spread of the Wuhan virus, and it was much worse than they were letting on. My worry about, and for the record, I'm 20 years away from the most at-risk demographic, but I am closer than anybody else. My worry, my worryometer is at 3 on getting Wuhan flu or Wuhan virus and suffering greatly from it, and perhaps even dying. I think that's extremely, extremely low. So I put it a 3. But I would put at an 8 my worry that my local grocery store is going to run out of beer before the weekend is through. So that I'm going to have to address.
Okay. All right. So I did ask Justin before, he failed to be on, how nervous he was. And he said,
wait a second. Wait a second.
Justin's here.
Look who's joining
Let me
us
full
here.
I am on. I didn't fail to be on.
Okay. Go ahead. What's up? What are you going to say? What you got?
No, go ahead. Keep going. Keep trashing me. Is this what it's like when I don't come on the show? Go on. Continue.
Don't you listen to it? We go the extra mile to trash you when you're not on the show.
I was not trashing you at all. I was just going to bring up that I asked you prior to this, right before we were about to record, where you were, and you said a 2. So are you going to upgrade your concern factor, or did I report that properly?
Yeah, a 2 is right. I think I've gone from 1.5 to 2. I'm not worried about it, and the reason I'm not worried about it is because I think I still believe it is being overblown. I think it's fine to take precautions. Shut down some of the stuff that we've been used to doing, big stadiums, things like that. I mean, I'm actually okay with that. I don't think that's a huge deal when you have these kinds of situations. When I say my worry scale is a 2, I don't mean that I'm not concerned that there are going to be some issues or problems or whatever. I just don't think that it's going to wipe out a huge number of people. I don't think that we're going to end up descending into some post-apocalyptic hellscape chaos. I just think we're going to be fine. I think everything is going to be fine. I think 6, maybe 2 or 3 months from now, it won't even be a story anymore. It'll be gone. The economy will be not necessarily back where it is right now prior to this all happening, but it will be greatly improved. People won't be worried about it anymore. Life will be totally normal. I think it's just a matter of a couple of months where people are going to be really nervous, and then everything is going to go away. And in fact, I saw an expert on a couple different experts essentially say that they expect that once the weather gets warmer, they fully expect that it's going to start being greatly reduced, because I guess warmer weather it actually kills the virus off for a variety of different reasons. Plus, people are less likely to be inside, and so it's harder to transmit it to people and all of that stuff. So I'm willing to bet you that in 2 months from now, this will be a minor story, and 3 months from now, it will be essentially a non-story, other than the fact that there'll be stories about things restarting that had been delayed or put on hold as a result of this. I really don't think this is going to be a problem even 2 to 3 months from now.
I will hope. I am optimistic. I will hope that is the case. I'm marking you down, though. Wrote it down. Justin's prediction, 2 months, that this will be a minor story. So my plan today was to, just this morning, my plan was to go grocery shopping tonight. Okay? Just get like a bunch of stuff that I needed, whatever, right? Not go overboard, but just kind of get the stuff that we needed just in case this does take a turn for the worse. And so I come in early to do the prep for this. And I'm sitting there, and there's 2 colleagues talking about how their experience going shopping the night prior, so Thursday night, and basically how there was like lines out the door, parking lots were filled, people were freaking out at the grocery store trying to get all the stuff that they needed. So I listened to this for about like 20 minutes as I was reading through some of these articles, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to wait for tonight. I'm going to run out and do this shopping right now. So I admittedly did some panic shopping in the midst of all of this stuff. I went to the Target right down the street. For like being like 8:30 in the morning on a Friday, it was pretty busy.
Yeah, who else did panic shopping? Honestly, I did. I bought a bunch of toilet paper, a bunch of water, and like $120 to $30.
See, this is the problem. It started a war over toilet paper, because like my girlfriend and I were out at Walgreens the other day, and I was like, I don't even know if we need toilet paper, but there's only one thing left, so I better grab it. Like,
yeah,
that's it. I mean, it's like the frog and the snake, and they're always constantly trying to, like, the frog gets immune to the poison, and then the snake gets more poisonous and eats the frog. Like, that's where we're at, people.
Jim, did you do any panic shopping?
I didn't do any panic shopping. My wife actually went to the store yesterday, and she noticed a run on milk and water and toilet paper and all of that. And I sent her a text saying, "It's like, well, tell me the really important thing. How low is the beer supply there?" And she said, it's lower than normal, but actually there's plenty of wine. So if you're anywhere in Lake Zurich and you're a wine fan, there's still, I guess, some still on hand. But I'm with Justin. I mean, I don't know if this will be pretty much out of the news in 2 months. I think the panic is definitely more dangerous than the flu. I mean, if you get, this has to be put in perspective. And actually, Donald Trump came under a lot of criticism for stating facts that should help everybody put these things, put this Wuhan flu into perspective. Just 2 years ago, in the United States, 80,000 Americans died from the flu. Just 2 years ago. It was a pretty bad flu season, the winter of 2017, 2018. You might remember the H1N1 virus, the so-called swine flu from 2009. 59 million Americans got swine flu in 2009. 265,000 Americans were hospitalized for swine flu, and 12,000 Americans died from swine flu in 2009. And that was a strain of the flu that infected 1.4 billion people around the world and killed as many as 500,000 people around the globe. What's happening? We're counting the number of deaths in the United States in 2 digits. And in fact, it's very, very tragic. But most of those deaths are coming from one nursing home in Washington State that got infected and didn't know what they had on their hands before it infected a lot of other very elderly at-risk people. And it's tragic. I think something like 22 or 25 of the patients at this nursing home have passed away from Wuhan virus. And that is very, very tragic. But it's not the 12,000 Americans who died from swine flu in 2009. And it's that perspective needs to be kept here. The chances of you getting this virus, contracting it, is relatively low. I think canceling, the NBA season, canceling March Madness. I mean, I can understand the desire to do that, to protect yourself and to show, these entities, these sports leagues are showing that they're taking this very seriously. But it would never have occurred to anybody to cancel the NHL season in the winter of 2017, 2018. Because 80,000 people, had died from the flu. It's just, we have to put this in perspective here. And the panic is much more dangerous. And we have to think about the economic damage this is doing to the country. It is incalculable how much economic damage is being done. Just from the sporting events that have been canceled. There are thousands and thousands of trips not being taken, hundreds of thousands of trips not being taken, plane tickets not purchased, rental cars not rented, gasoline not put into the car if you're going to go on a road trip for one of the regional games. And then the downstream from this economically is just devastating. All of the hotel workers, all the taxes that these local governments would have collected from people visiting and attending these sporting events. I mean, we can't even really get our heads around the kind of economic damage that is being done. And that's even putting aside all the conferences in Vegas and other places that have all been canceled. I think Disney, either Disneyland or Disney World, is closed for a few days. I mean, the economic damage is so much more dangerous to people than the flu actually is.
Sure. Okay. So
you got to buy the dip.
Well, yes,
that's
sure.
what I do.
But
I see that, I take a big old wad, put it right here, and that's the dip, baby.
Also, buy Netflix right now when everyone's quarantined.
Oh yeah.
Boom.
So wait, I want your theory though, Jim, because I get it. Putting into context, I know everyone's trying to compare it to the flu. Certainly this seems to be a little bit more serious than the flu.
Sure.
The reason why there's more flu victims is because it's more of a widespread thing. So the potential of this becoming a more widespread thing means that it could be more serious. So what's your theory as to why the panic is a little bit or a lot more this time around than compared to the swine flu in prior years?
I mean, the swine flu obviously was a big story. It was unique. It was different. It was a differentiation from the normal flu seasons in the United States and around the world. And I just think our media is completely out of control. Out
of control then, though?
No, it was not covered like this. I mean, come on. We see headlines and 100th person has come down with 100th case of Wuhan virus, diagnosed and all this stuff. I mean, come on, this is so out of proportion. The media has gone completely insane on this. I mean, I got home last night and we had WGN is the local news station I watch here a lot, but WGN has normal programming actually when after 7 o'clock and 7:30, 8 o'clock, all that stuff. They were going nonstop news, nothing but coronavirus all night. I mean, come on. This is completely out of proportion to the danger that this actually presents to the American people.
All right. So Justin, are you still with us?
He's here.
Yep.
Justin,
right.
Your wife is a doctor. Tell us what she thinks.
That's a good question.
Do that, and then speak to the kind of the difference between how the media was treating swine flu just a couple of years ago and today, because I would assume, and maybe I might be putting words in Jim's mouth here, but I would assume that the media hasn't gotten so much crazier in just the last couple of years, unless that's what you're saying.
So I actually agree with Jim that things have gotten a lot crazier since then. And I'm going in the media, and I'm going to say, I mean, I understand that with this audience, it's not exactly the most controversial thing to say, but generally speaking, this is a pretty controversial statement. I think that a portion of this is being driven by anti-Trump hatred in the press. Because if this was President Obama, I actually think even if President Obama was doing exactly the same things that Donald Trump had done, I think that the narrative in the media would be a little bit different than the narrative in the media right now. I think that many people in the press actually want this to be a massive crisis and problem, not only because if it bleeds, it leads, but also because it would significantly damage Donald Trump's chances of becoming president in 2020. I do think that there is an element of that. I'm not saying it's totally about that, but I do think there's an element of it. And I think that they're rooting for Trump to fail. They've been rooting for Trump to fail from the very beginning. The stock market is crashing. The economy is the thing that the Trump administration is running on, essentially, for 2020. That's their big thing. And so if the economy crashes, what does Trump have left? I mean, that was his major, I mean, he has other things he can point to, but that was his major achievement. And if that crashes too, and they can somehow blame him and his administration for why this is all happening, which is ridiculous, but that's what a lot of people are already starting to do, I think that it plays right into that. And I believe that there's an element of this that's related to that. I think that there are differences related to the swine flu and H1N1, stuff, other things that have come up, SARS, etc., that are related to that make this a little bit different than those things. And one of those things is that we're learning that it's really easy for this to be passed along. I think that that's a really big part of it. It spreads very, very quickly. And as a result of that, there's a very real chance that people in your life are going to contract this disease, even if, and not just people that you know, but there's a very real chance that celebrities, for example, professional athletes, see this happen, right? Tom Hanks contracted it. There's a couple players in the NBA who have gotten it. People everybody knows, and so I think there's an element of fear there, and I think that plays. I think that all plays into it as well. So I think that there's a real threat that people might actually contract this. And that was not something that people were worried about with a lot of these other diseases in the same sort of way. That it's spread, coupled with the fact that there are people dying, deliberately misled a lot of people, and that made people very nervous from the very beginning. And the fact that the media wants the Trump administration to fail. They frankly want the economy to collapse. That's what Bill Maher was openly advocating for that. I think all of that together, when you piece all of this together, I think it creates this feeling that we have right now. But Jim is exactly right. If you're going to take a level-headed approach and look at what's going on, should we do things to be concerned about it? Should we think a little bit more carefully about the decisions that we're making? Should we try to be a little more hygienic as a society? All of that stuff, absolutely, yes. I'm even more willing to say than maybe Jim is, I don't know, to say, yeah, suspend the NBA season for a month or two and suspend Major League Baseball. I mean, do those things. Yes, but is this really the sort of threat that people are making it out to be? Are we really likely to have millions of people die from this? No. Statistically, at this point in time, no, we're not. This even if you're a healthy person, I mean, 99 point whatever % of healthy people that contract this survive, and the symptoms really aren't any worse necessarily than the regular flu, as far as all the media reports that I've seen. So it's more deadly for groups of people who are at risk, and so maybe we need to be more careful than usual for those at-risk groups. And maybe we need to make sure that we're not spending time around those people if we ourselves are at risk of contracting this. But I don't think it's going to be a world killer. I don't think we're going to have millions of people dead. I don't think we're going to have an economic crash caused by this unless fear just gets totally out of control. I think a lot of this is way overhyped, way overblown, and I do believe there is an element of it where the Democratic Party is frankly just hoping that this crushes Trump and crushes Republicans, and I do think that there's an element of that here.
Prophets of doom.
So Isaac, I mean, feel free to respond to that, but also just kind of like the idea of people overreacting. So recently the Illinois governor came out and basically said that they weren't going to allow gatherings of more than like 250 people, that they would go and break up events if they were over 1,000 people. Obviously, we've already talked about the different sports leagues that have suspended their seasons. Do you welcome the overreaction, or do you think that are you more concerned about the economic ramifications like Jim?
Oh man. So I don't mind the private, groups deciding that they're going to curtail their own behavior. It starts to get weird when the government says you can't have groups of more than 250, but I guess I get it. I don't know. I'm less concerned about the economic ramifications, because I think those are more temporary. If people aren't out and about spending their paychecks right now, it just means they'll have more to spend later, or they're spending it on prepping supplies. So it's not necessarily to me a huge concern, because that money's not evaporating. Yeah, that's my take. I have to jump, but here are things that I want to hear about when I listen to the rest of this podcast, because I will. Justin, would Medicare for All have prevented all of this? That's what I hear all the time. And you never said what Jackie thinks about this. So toodles.
And Isaac did not win the Democratic Survivor Pool.
I did not.
We'll talk about that later.
Do that. I lost. Don't do what Isaac did.
Yeah.
You should always ask, what would Isaac do, unless it's picking your Democratic Survivor Pool people. So thank you, everyone.
What would Isaac do?
You should. Each and every one of you should always ask, what would Isaac do in this moment?
Okay, good. Will do. Justin, feel free to respond to his question there. I have heard different politicians being like, what, is he still there?
No, Isaac just quit.
Yeah, he's out.
Yeah, Isaac's gone. I'm still here.
Politicians coming out and saying, like all the different alarmism and government plans, like, hey, this is just a Medicare for all, universal health care. Like, doesn't it sound good nowadays? So I guess your response to that.
Yeah, I think first of all, that's all part of the whole never let a good crisis go to waste strategy that the left loves to utilize. I saw that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was not only calling for Medicare for all, she also wanted universal basic income. She was somehow trying to make an argument for that related to all of this too. So no, I don't think it would make any difference at all. I don't even know how that argument plays into it. Since really the main issue, as far as I know, and a lot of this actually does come from my wife, who, for those of you who are listening and don't know, my wife is a doctor. She's a neurosurgery resident, and she's also a global health expert at Harvard. She's a fellow there. And so she's super into all of this, very well connected, knows a lot about what's going on. And essentially what she's been telling me is that the main reason why America is having or in a position where things could potentially go badly here is mostly because they haven't been testing enough. So if you look at the countries that have done a good job, like South Korea, for example, at preventing things from getting really out of control, doing something that's being referred to as flattening the curve, and you'll see that in the news a lot. The reason those countries have been successful is because they're testing everybody for it. And they're doing lots and lots and lots of widespread tests. And the reason that's effective is because if you know you have it, then you're likely to quarantine yourself, right? You're likely to stay home. The problem we have right now is that there are people out there who have it and they don't know they have it. And they're walking around spreading it to other people without knowing it. We need tests. We need lots of widespread testing. Medicare for all is not really going to have anything to do with that. We don't need Medicare for all to have widespread testing. The issue is we need to make sure we're getting tests in the hands of doctors across the country. And frankly, the government has not been doing a very good job of helping to make that happen. And they've had a lot of issues related to that because the government is not effective at doing much of anything. And this is really no different. I don't see how giving government even more power over the system would somehow have improved things. What we need to do is make sure that people have access to these tests. We need to get as many of these tests out into the public as possible so that people can take them. If you are a poor person, you're a person who doesn't have health insurance for whatever reason, then I think you could make a public health justification for having government local government or state government paying for that, so that people can get tested, and if they are test positive, stay home. But I don't really think it has anything to do with I don't think Medicare for all would have anything to do with that. My wife is concerned about it, but not so concerned that we're not traveling and that we're significantly changing our lives. We're really not. Her main concern is exactly the testing issue. She really thinks it's important that people get tested and that we have these tests widely available. If that happens, it will have a significant positive impact on what's going on. It's very unlikely to spread rapidly if that were to occur, but it hasn't happened yet. And I do think you can blame the Trump administration a little bit for that. Although I think that probably would be the case regardless of who is in office right now, because I think it's just, this is the way government works. Government's really ineffective, really bad at doing these things. And that's a big part of the problem. I don't think the FDA is helping either, by the way, because, of course, it's so expensive to develop these vaccines and everything else. And there's all sorts of hoops that people have to jump through. I'm sure that's slowing things down as well, coming up with a vaccination for it.
So there's a couple of pieces that I wanted to talk about a little bit regarding this, but some of them were already touched on a little bit. So one is from Reason Foundation. It's titled "Coronavirus Will Be Deadly to Your Liberty," but basically this is all surrounding that Rahm Emanuel quote. Don't let a good disaster go to waste or crisis go to waste. So I'll link all of this in the show notes if people are interested. I also have a item from the Heritage Foundation, which is called "Sound Policies Responses to Economic Consequences of the Coronavirus." So this kind of goes through what the government is suggesting we do to kind of help the economy along while we're all kind of dealing with this, and why some of those ideas are bad and which ones are good. Since this is probably going to be a news item for a while, I might actually just save this one. Because we've already been talking about this for about 30 minutes, and I want to get to some other topics. But there is one that I do want to really address. This is also from Reason, and it's coronavirus economics. And basically, this is mostly centered around the toilet paper, like a meme. So if you've been on any type of social media, you'll know that there has been a run on toilet paper, and everyone is pretending like toilet paper is like this golden item that's so valuable and all of that. And what this kind of goes into specifically is the anti-price gouging legislation. So even I, on a Facebook group that I have, that's kind of like the local area that I live in, there was somebody that was just this morning kind of complaining about how they went to a Walgreens and there was a 4-pack of toilet paper that was being sold for $11. And they were accusing this Walgreens of price gouging. So the important economic lesson from all of this is that price increases are actually a good thing. They help ration stuff. So you go and see that there's a 4-pack of toilet paper that's worth $11 and you're outraged, but maybe you only buy 1 or 2, the amount that you actually need, and not all of them.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, and then not only that, that also sends price signals to the manufacturers of these goods to make more of them. So it's all price signals, supply and demand, economics, free markets. They all have these self-regulating structures and price incentives that, okay, so here's a good example that they mentioned here. So the profit margin for these products are more. So in Japan, electronic giants Sharp started to use its TV factories to make surgical masks when the domestic supply went dry, because they found that they can make a bigger profit on selling these masks than make TVs. So all of those economic factors are disrupted when the government comes in and mandates that you can't sell something for a higher price. It might sound bad, that these places are hiking up prices of water and toilet paper and Clorox wipes or something like that. But it all plays a role in the larger economics. So I just kind of wanted to address that because you can't go on Facebook without seeing something about toilet paper. Jim, last words on coronavirus before we move on to a different topic.
No, I think that's actually a very good point. I mean, if if a 4-pack of toilet paper is going for $11, that's actually the market at work, and it works just the way you described. The market will figure this out, and price controls will actually only increase scarcity. A higher price for these things will make it so that they're not scarce. That's what price signals do in a well operating free market. And just to kind of piggyback on something that Justin was just talking about, and you mentioned, Donnie, how Rahm Emanuel said, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. You see that in Congress right now. There will be a bill to spend more money to battle Wuhan virus here in the United States. And I think I saw one of our least favorite senators, and really one of the worst senators in the country, Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, mention that this is a great time to get a carbon tax, to get a price on carbon in there. So you're going to see an emergency spending bill to deal with this that's going to be larded up with so much garbage. AOC is going to try to get some Green New Deal stuff in there. All the climate crazies in Congress are going to try to cram their stuff in there. It would be great if Trump, as Justin said, a lot of this crazy coverage is because it will damage Trump. It would be great to see Trump threaten and carry through with a veto on a bill like that has all this garbage thrown into it, because the Democrats simply cannot resist, and the Republicans would do this too. They can't resist putting their own little personal agendas and pet projects that would never pass on their own into an emergency spending bill like this. I think everybody listening to this should keep an eye on that. And frankly, maybe call their congressman and say, quit playing around with this stuff and do what needs to be done to help protect the country, and take up this garbage later.
Okay, Andy, you got something to say?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that the whole coronavirus outbreak, I do consider a way for government to continue to infringe upon civil liberties. I mean, I've heard rumors that they might open up a new department in government to deal with things like this. And there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, as Milton Friedman said. But at times like these, we have to weigh like public health, which is obviously important, but we also have to weigh protecting our civil liberties and ensuring that we keep them as this goes down.
I mean, there are some like CDC laws that basically allow the government to quarantine people
without even testing positive.
For any like a given amount of time. It's always under the scope of, this is an emergency.
You can be quarantined without testing positive, and then the way it works is then you have to petition to be let free from quarantine through government officials. But during times like this, how much do you think they really care about taking care, like watching these cases and being like, oh, you have it, you don't have? I mean, this is going to. And again, I'm not saying we need to just ignore all this, but this is going to be something where us as libertarians and conservatives need to fight to protect the civil liberties.
Yeah, I mean, this will be a topic that we will be covering for the next few weeks, surely, as this stuff either gets worse or hopefully gets better. But I don't want to dedicate the entire episode to this. There was a really interesting report that I wanted to kind of get to. I actually wanted to get to it last week, but we saved it for this week, which is from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And this is out of the country of China. So we've talked about China a number of times on this podcast. Yes, we have. And one of the things is the detention facilities that they have in the western portion in the Xinjiang province. And Justin, if I'm missing some details, feel free to jump in. But basically what's going on there is there's a group of people that are called the Uyghurs that are like a Muslim minority in China that are considered like political dissidents by the powers that be in China. And they are routinely arrested and sent to re-education camps, quote unquote, re-education vocational training camps, if they are caught doing something as mundane as having biblical words on their phone. Like it could be that, right? And we talked about this as basically it's like a concentration camp for this population, and under the guise of it being a re-education camp or vocational training. So this report that I have kind of goes into some another facet of this, which is kind of alarming. But before I get into it, Justin, am I missing anything on that brief description?
I don't know that you mentioned that they're mostly Muslim. I don't know that you mentioned that, but that they are. That's a large part of this. It's a lot of this is fear of. It's a lot is Islamophobia essentially on the part of the Chinese Communist Party, and making sure that these groups of people, because a lot of people don't realize this, but China is actually composed of many different nationalities, religions, etc., sort of all under the or ethnicities rather, all under the same country of China. China's a massive land area, and this part of China is in the far eastern part of China, far western part of China. Yeah. And as a result of that, they have a lot of concerns about different groups, and they're cracking down on them. And a big part of it is religion.
Yeah, I definitely did mention that. So, but thank you. So yeah, like these camps supposedly, it's very kind of mysterious. There's obviously not very clear numbers on this, but some of the estimates are like upwards of like 2 million people are in these camps.
I saw one that was 3 million. I saw it was the high end. Yeah,
millions. Yeah. So, and again, just for like going to like religious things, like anything can land you in one of these camps if you're like one of these Muslim Uyghurs, right? So the concern was that these were concentration camps, that there was torture going on here, indoctrination, all types of things, and it was all under the guise of vocational training and re-education to be able to reform these people so that they can re-enter society as a functioning Chinese citizen. So that alone is just absolutely horrible. So this report from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute basically found out that there was a little bit more to the vocational training aspect of it that we kind of disregarded, that these people were being basically trained to work in factories. Then they were being like sold to other provinces in China to work in factories that are associated with very well-known global brands. Okay, so this report says that 83 well-known global brands have factories that are associated with what is essentially slave labor. And those brands include and are not limited to Abercrombie & Fitch, Acer, Adidas, Amazon, Apple, BMW, Dell, General Motors, General Electric, Huawei, Mercedes-Benz, Panasonic, Ralph Lauren, Sharp, Samsung, Toshiba, Victoria's Secret, Nintendo, Microsoft, Sony, if I didn't mention that, Gap. Like, it's all over the place. So obviously the places that have been kind of pointed out by this have all released different statements, or at least most of them have, which have run the gambit of just flat out denying that this is the case. Huawei being an example, which is a Chinese company, saying that because of the U.S. policy towards China, they're claiming that the Australian group had a conflict of interest, and they just basically don't buy that this is real. Dell said they're investigating. Nike is reviewing their suppliers' hiring practices, etc. So, Justin, I mean, the idea that China using slave labor, pretty crazy. I don't even know if we, who have been very critical of China, would have thought it was this far.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's any worse than what we already knew. I think that the real story here is that it's being done in a way that actually relates it to people on the other side of the world. So when you buy an Apple phone, just some of the components in that Apple phone, were they made in a factory by people who were essentially slaves or indentured servants or something to that effect? Possibly, very possibly. That's what we're learning here. And I think this story really interests me for a variety of reasons. It shows you what governments can do. It shows you the power of the Chinese Communist Party. It shows you just how evil the Communist Party in China is, assuming that this story is true. And much of the story has been corroborated in a variety of different ways. So even if it's not exactly as it has been reported, we do know that these labor camps exist at the very least, these concentration camps, re-education camps, whatever you want to call them, that they exist, that lots and lots of people are in them. And so we do know that's very likely to be true. I think what it shows, though, in a world where we're obsessed with coronavirus, and you have several thousand people dying from coronavirus, which is a huge tragedy, to be sure, without any question at all. Why is it that a story also related to China, a story about 1 to 3 million people being enslaved in China and becoming essentially, either slave labor or borderline slave labor, so that people in America can have, and the West, and really the whole rest of the world, can have cheap consumer goods? How is that not a more important story? So 4,000 or 5,000 people potentially are dead. Let's say that's 10 times that. Even if it's 10 times that by the time this is all through, or even more than that, even if it's 20 or 30 times that, it's not going to come anywhere near the fact that we have 1 to 3 million people treated essentially as slaves in China. They're Muslims, and the Chinese government doesn't trust or like Muslims. That, it seems to me, that is a much larger humanitarian crisis, and it's really not getting much attention. And again, that point goes back to the media. Why isn't the media as interested in this story as these other stories they love to talk about? Not just coronavirus, but all kinds of other things too. Why is this not getting as much attention as it deserves? I think that's an important question.
So Jim, I mean, I was talking with a different colleague about this report earlier this week, and I said, like, I bet if I were to give this report to, like, my very liberal uncle, he would look at it, read through it, and say, "Yeah, this is the problem with capitalism. Like, this is, look at all these capitalist corporations that are benefiting off of slave labor in these other countries." So, what's your kind of response to that?
Well, I mean, I'll try to avoid saying your uncle is a moron, but I will say that this is what happens. You know, it's amazing. This is one of the most underreported stories in the world. China has long ago figured out. They observed the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Chinese, it's the communist Chinese. They have perfected. They figured out that you could have capitalism, you could have that, and still be a totalitarian communist society at the same time. But emphasis on totalitarian, because that's what communism is. It's the control over your society, yet they can still get rich and sustain their society through their exploitation of capitalism, practicing it in a way that is wholly exploitative, and where it's oligarchical, where so many people in China are very wealthy, and they travel around the world and are treated with respect and deferred to in that way, but they are still a totalitarian society. And the fact that that some of these corporations you mentioned, Donnie, are super into virtue signaling. They are so into telling Americans that they need to get their act together, that they need to be more woke. And yet here they are exploiting slave labor in China to keep their products more affordable for us, to actually increase their profit margins. That is not how capitalism is necessarily supposed to work. But it is never ever mentioned, and maybe this the Wuhan virus global pandemic is going to draw more attention to China and their society, because the world's eyes were on China when they were obviously lying about the number of people that were infected with the Wuhan virus. They were viral videos were going out of guerrilla videos of people being locked into their homes and dragged away in vans. I mean, these things happen, and they only happen in totalitarian societies. It is not that is certainly not a hallmark of Western capitalism or Western societies, where capitalism and freedom go together very well, economic freedom and political freedom. China has figured out how to have some sort of economic freedom while having no political freedom, so that they can be totalitarian and get rich at the same time. I really hope that the world starts to pay more attention to this, and I really think people should be starting to hold corporations like Apple accountable for the practices that they employ corporately, and don't seem to pay any single social price in the United States for it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so I have two thoughts on this. One, any U.S. company that is using what is essentially slave labor in China does deserve to be reprimanded for that and punished for that. But at the same time, if we look over what's happened in China in the last 30 years, I mean, that went from a country from complete poverty to a point where over 1 billion people have been brought out of just the bottom of the bottom. So I do think that American industry going into China, and there are harsher conditions there, has greatly improved the lives of many people. Again, if it's slave labor, that is a problem. But Chinese people working in workers' living conditions right now, I mean, we went through that in America at one point, and we pulled out into what we are now. So I do think we have to consider that American companies outsourcing some of their manufacturing to China is benefiting billions of people.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about that. Obviously, the big delineation, the big distinction is slave labor.
Yeah, slave labor is definitely the important part. Slave labor we cannot condone.
All right, so this is a very interesting story, and I think that this is going to be something you're going to have to look for it. It's obviously not going to be presented in front of you, but there is going to be updates as more companies kind of respond to this, and I'm kind of curious to see what the response will be. So I'll try to keep us updated on that. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to talk a little bit about politics. So this, I think, compared to the last couple of topics, will be a little bit more fun. So
good.
So we can kind of decompress a little bit and talk about just the goofiness that is Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders. But we got to give the updates. There has been an update in our Democratic survivor pool. Just I think it was like a week and a half ago, Elizabeth Warren dropped out. She's done. So that also ends Jim's possibility of actually winning this thing. So he is done. There's only 4 people. So Isaac's done. I'm done. I got last place. Jim is out. And then so there's only 2 people that still have candidates in this thing, which is Andy, who has
2.
Biden was his first round pick, and Tulsi Gabbard, who is staying in out of spite. I really don't get it. She's still in there. And Justin has obviously Bernie Sanders and Bill Weld, who we threw in there as just kind of the filler because we needed 25 candidates.
Worst
at the time.
libertarian vice president candidate of all time. Personally, not a fan, if you can't tell.
Yeah. So it seems like this is Justin's to win, even if Bernie Sanders loses.
Yeah.
Who the update on 538, which does the odds projections for the candidates, has Biden at 99% chance of winning, and Bernie is at a 0% chance of winning.
Where's Tulsi?
I don't even think they put her on there anymore. Definitely 0. But I don't know. Justin, I go to you.
Justin's gone.
Oh, Justin's gone. Okay. Go to you, Jim.
Yeah.
Do you think Bernie Sanders has got a shot? 538 saying no. Do you think there is any shot that our favorite socialist will still have a shot at the nomination?
No, I mean, I guess there's always a chance. I mean, there's a chance that Joe Biden somehow implodes. They do have a debate that they moved from Arizona to Washington, D.C. I believe it's this weekend. Yeah. So there's another debate. Of course, it's pointless. It's not as if Bernie Sanders is now going to win the nomination. So something could happen in that debate. I mean, something really, really dramatic and crazy could happen. I mean, Joe Biden could forget that he's in Washington, D.C. and talk about how I'm glad to be here in Arizona with all of you great Arizonans. Who knows? I mean,
Joe Biden, I'm running for Senate.
Well,
that's right. I mean, he could demonstrate in the debate that he is so unfit for office, which I think he's already demonstrated quite well all over the campaign trail. And so there would be an outside chance. But even then, I think we would go to a broker convention and Bernie's not going to get the nomination.
Okay.
Well, so it would be somebody else. And actually, riding in on a white horse might even be Hillary Clinton at that point.
No.
By the way, a Real Clear Politics does an odds aggregator too.
What's she at?
Hillary Clinton has a better shot, according to them, at getting the presidency than Bernie Sanders. But I think that's the big X factor. So I did a little bit of salt mining, which is basically trying to see the tiers of the losing side by going on the Bernie Sanders Reddit page. And they are actually holding out hope. They're a very optimistic crowd over there. And they think that the game changer is going to be this upcoming debate. And the fact that Biden is going to be on stage with Bernie Sanders for a full, hour and a half, 2 hours. And that coupled with, first off, that it's just the one-on-one. That coupled with the fact that Biden is losing his mind. So
Sad.
the consensus is on that side again in the Bernie Sanders group that the Biden campaign is trying to hide Biden from the media, and they're actually turning down media appearances because right now he could just ride this wave of success to the candidacy, and he could only hurt himself by appearing on TV and confusing his presidential run with a Senate run, and confusing Thursdays with Tuesdays, and telling people that he's going to slap him across the face
And just,
at yeah,
like hair comments.
yeah, like he could legitimately shoot himself in the foot during a debate. So I think that is the biggest X factor. That's why I would give Bernie Sanders still that 1% shot.
Well, I mean, I guess. I mean, it's really actually quite sad. And you know, if you go on Twitter and you see that when people point out that it is obvious that Joe Biden has lost a lot of his cognitive ability that he displayed when he was vice president with Barack Obama, and people attacking people for mentioning this on Twitter or elsewhere is really unfounded, and people can see right through that. I mean, look, it's actually quite sad what's happening here. Many people listening to this podcast and have family members that have gone through something like this. That Dad just isn't the same anymore. Dad's forgetting some things. We have to take the keys away from Dad because it's not safe for him to drive anymore. These things are real, and I'm sorry, Joe Biden, and he's actually also one of the other symptoms or telltale signs of a declining, frankly, the onset of dementia is that you start getting angry about things that seem strange to get angry about. I mean, we've all had family members that have, not all, but so many of us have had family members that have gone through this where, suddenly grandpa's getting really mad at something that doesn't seem that upsetting. You shouldn't be getting so mad about that. Joe Biden's expressing that or showing that on the campaign trail, like he did at the auto workers factory in Michigan just the other day. I mean, these things are real, and I think it's sad. And I think people are going to vote that way. I don't think if the Democrats nominate and go forward with Joe Biden as the standard bearer for the Democratic Party, Donald Trump's biggest danger is going to be going too hard on him, as like the political equivalent of clubbing a baby seal. I mean, Joe Biden is not going to be able to go toe to toe with Donald Trump. Yeah. And I think the Democratic Party might even come to realize that we shouldn't put him through that we have to find another way. And there will be a convention where they might be able to do that and find another way and another candidate.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly am thinking more about that, or just more about who's going to be his VP if he ends up stepping down after like a year.
Who do you think his VP will be? Do you have any predictions?
So Klobuchar apparently almost slipped and said that it's already been a done deal that she's going to be the VP.
Oh, I'd love to see how her hair would fare in a blizzard.
I too. But yeah, so I don't know. Seriously, at one level, I think on Twitter, there's still just oh my gosh, the daily gaffe from Joe Biden, and everyone's laughing about it. But I'm getting to the point. I have gotten to the point where
you're no longer laughing.
No, I'm not laughing anymore. It's sad. It's legitimately sad. Like the auto workers thing or whatever that you were referring to. There was a point where the handler is like, all right, we've got to go, after he threatened to slap the guy in the face or whatever. Where just the look on Joe Biden's face was like he was confused at where he was. It was legitimately sad. I'm serious.
And you heard the same thing about Trump, how he's losing his mind and stuff like that. He's got dementia.
That's garbage.
I can't go back further than that than Trump, but Trump was lucid. You could tell.
Oh no,
lucid.
Come on, man. I was actually that Wednesday night when he went out and when he came on TV and did that speech or whatever. I was just like, all right, it was a good speech, whatever. And then I was just thinking afterwards, I was like, if we were sitting here and Joe Biden had to do this, what would he even say?
Sniff some people.
It's seriously creepy. So I don't know. It's kind of bizarre to me that 538 would say that Bernie has 0% chance. I mean, I don't think that they're factoring in this other mental capabilities. And if he starts referring to the moderator at the debate as mom or something, seriously, I don't know.
And we should also remember, as we're wrapping up here, remember that, okay, let's just pretend this was the same Joe Biden of say the late 80s or the 90s or even, the beginning of the Obama administration. His policies that he would put forward are still very hard to the left. I mean, he's a Green New Deal guy. He's a stop fracking all over the country guy. I mean, so we're not even actually talking about his policies, which would be ruinous for our economy in this country, because we're talking about the thing that you can't not talk about. And it's the fact that there's been an obvious cognitive mental decline in Joe Biden. And it's time to talk about it. And maybe the Democratic Party is going to say it's time to take the keys away from grandpa, because that's what they need to do.
There'll be plenty.
He'll get down and he'll do push-ups with you.
There'll be plenty of time to talk about his policies, especially if it just becomes like the obvious that he's the candidate, which apparently 538 is already saying that's the case. So in coming months, we can kind of dissect some of that stuff. But that'll about do it for us, gentlemen. Any last words of wisdom or anything like that?
Glad to be on the show for the first full time. Clearly, I've earned a contract to be on here further. So great to be here.
Okay.
That was my last words.
All right, audience, thank you for joining us this Friday. Join us every Friday for a new episode of In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe, rate, or review for us on iTunes. We would greatly appreciate it. You could also find us on Stitcher, Google Play, SoundCloud, YouTube even, especially if you want to put a face to the voice. Check that out. If you would like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you want to send us your comments, suggestions, questions, anything like that, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Jay Lakely. You can also find the Heartland Institute at Heartland Inst. And I actually want to have our listeners, we have a brand new website, the Heartland Institute, called Climate at a Glance. It's kind of self-explanatory. I'm not even going to describe it. You should go check it out. I think you'll find it very informative.
Fantastic. You can find Justin at Justin T. Haskins. Look for the beautiful blue check mark.
Unfollow.
Isaac is the fracking guy. Both of those guys dipped out before the end of the podcast. You can find Andy here in the dark corner.
Generally just right here.
Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you next week.